This session is very dynamic in the sense that concept of life came a few years back in a structured form. I recall the days when our Honorable Prime Minister had spoken lifestyles for environment. It evolved into lifestyles for sustainable development. And it's possible to have such lifestyles. It has been now envisioned. And there are many areas on it. How do we go ahead with it? I'll not go much into it to start with, but there are certain facets of it. Sustainable consumption and production. Because if our consumption is sustainable, we'll have to have production also to meet sustainability. These are the areas from which it's giving traction to it. There are other facets like going beyond GDP. How do we measure, say, well-being? And how financing, technology, etc. can support these initiatives. My question is that we do talk of lifestyles, changing lifestyles, which meet sustainability. But we have seen many people who don't have, we say they don't have a mindset for change or lifestyle-based, thinking. But at the same time, for example, if somebody goes out of a big hall and some lights are on, maybe a significant percent of people will not switch it off. But when they leave their home, water is flowing from a tap that is more or less closed 99.99% times. If something is there, like say candle is burning in the home, everybody has a mindset, yes, I should extinguish it before leaving. So it's a broad spectrum of action. Sometimes the actions are taken, sometimes not taken. So how do you feel that the lifestyles, the mindset should be changed or are changing on this issue? Ligia.
First of all, thank you for the invitation. And, I actually cleared my whole day today, and you cannot imagine how crazy the week has been, in order to be here the whole day just to listen in, because whenever you have anything to do with India or Brazil or any of these countries, yesterday I was with the Brazil event, there's always so much passion and there's so much excitement about ideas, about innovation, about the digital, that it kind of fires you up to thinking, what is it that these countries have to offer to the world? I'm not digressing from your question. I'm coming to the answer. I don't have an answer, but I will come to it. The issue is really important for us to understand why consumption and production and their sustainability are so important to a new development paradigm. And they're important because of the issue of inequality. They are important because of the issue of future. If we talk about just mindsets and just about lifestyles without people understanding why it will make a difference to their lives, they're not going to make those changes. They will invest in it when they see that there is a very important aspect of both existential nature, but also in terms of their own responsibility. Today, I heard a lot of references to inclusivity, to responsibility, to digital, and it was really important to hear all those ideas. But in the context of development, and I'm a development economist, although I work for the United Nations Environmental Program, in the context of development, in order to be able to create change, you need to work on consumption and production. You need to transform the market, and you cannot transform the market by just looking at how to switch off lights or how to turn off the taps. You need system-wide changes, as we heard earlier today on the digital. If you need system-wide changes for the digital, you need system-wide changes for consumption and production. And the important thing to understand here is to unpack, because there is no solution that fits the whole world. There's no solution that fits the whole of India, let alone solution for other developing countries who are much worse off than India. And so in the context of consumption, we need to look at who is under-consuming, who is over-consuming, and where is it that we can align consumption with sustainability and with values. And that brings me to a lot of the conversation this morning, which I thought was very, very interesting, about values. If you're talking about education, if you're talking about women, we can include the ideas of sustainability in the choice-making for consumption. If you go into that fundamental perspective of why consumption needs to change, it does not mean consumption being reduced, but consumption being aligned with sustainability. And to align consumption with sustainability, we require to get all the agents of change aligned with sustainability thinking. And so, for example, the advertising companies, for example, using your digital tools to be able to track what I consume and do not consume. How is it that I can use digital to enable me to know that the choices I make today will have impacts for tomorrow's generation? Let us think of digital not only from the point of view of addressing our today's consumption, but the implications of today's consumption to the future. But fundamentally, to change mindsets, you need to get people to align with sustainability, because you're not only talking of an inequality crisis, you're talking of a planetary crisis. You need to put both of those together to make the changes we need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've spoken about inequality, and we know that generally it is said inequality among nations is increasing, or within countries is also increasing. Gini coefficient is a workhorse to measure inequality. It's a very good indicator to the extent of measuring, say, equality or inequality per se, but not inequity. For example, if everybody's income is doubled, the Gini coefficient remains same. But if you go into, say, absolute terms, somebody was earning 1,000, his income is doubled to 2,000. Somebody's income was 5,000, doubles to 10,000. Now the gap between incomes, and when you go to the market, it's the money in your pocket which matters to buy, to have command over goods and services. So here, the issue is, you have spoken on digitalization also. How can digital tools help in reducing inequality?
You know, you made a statement about inequality growing between countries. Actually, inequality between countries is going down. It's inequality within countries that's going up. And that is a very interesting data point. And it's also very interesting because when we talk, say, even of climate actions and other actions, we do not take that into account when we also take up positions in the negotiations. In the negotiations, we really need to take into account the idea that we have different tonnages of carbon which are being emitted by the different consumers within a country. And globally, it ranges from 1 ton per capita to 78 tons per capita in some of the developed countries. Now, when you talk of digital tools, there are various ways in which you can use these digital tools to come up with some kind of sufficiency ideas. There are 3 things which are out there in the current thinking on consumption. One is the idea of sufficiency, one is the idea of circularity, and one is the idea of inclusivity. In the context of sufficiency, if you were, for example, to come up with an idea of how much a person should consume so that the underconsumption is met and the overconsumption is reduced in terms of the wastage, not just in terms of consuming less, but consuming productively without waste, then your digital tools can be used to track this. The kinds of stories we heard today just show how digital tools can be really programmed to enable us to go to the market and know what is it that we are doing in terms of improving our ability to consume more sustainably. India has come up with eco-marks. I just met with the Secretary of Environment who spoke of the eco-marks that they're developing. That's like a second price in a product that we consume. So when you go to the supermarket or wherever it is you're buying digital tools, you can add up where is it their carbon footprint, your environmental footprint is actually adding up. And then you link that with how much you're spending, and that will give you a chance to change your consumption towards sustainability. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I think it was very insightful. And before I move to Nicolas next, on inequalities across the countries, is conditional convergence happening? Are absolute differences increasing? That still remains an area. Nicolas, with your kind of experience, there's an issue of development finance to move towards, say, a new paradigm, having, say, lifestyle as the basis of it. And to evolve resilient infrastructure, which is sort of a public good. When we say a public good, if it is a pure public good, it should not exclude people, it should not be rivalrous. But many of the public goods are. If there's a bridge on which there is a toll and everybody cannot pay the toll. Anyhow, what is your take on these issues like development financing and resilient infrastructure for life?
Thank you very much, Dr. Anand. I would like maybe to share 3 remarks. The first one will be extremely short, because we are in the context of exploring or supporting or digging deeper into this life economy, right? And I was constantly thinking about so many times we have heard presidents from the United States, right, saying very boldly that they would accept a lot of things, but not that any aspects of international negotiations would change the American way of life, right? And we also understand that somehow in terms of inequalities, but also consumption or overconsumption and footprints and so on and so on and so on, which I would also include aspects of value and supply chains supported by globally interconnected infrastructure systems. It is rather obvious that this system of production and consumption and growth has reached many limitations, maybe not all limitations, but many limitations. And that we are at a moment where the negative spillover aspects in terms of course, ecosystems and so on, tend to be far superior than the others, that is reducing poverty globally and so on. So that is the first remark. Then the second one would be about why it is so difficult to implement the Agenda 2030. And I like very much the title of the report that is welcoming us here about these new frontiers and be bold enough to think now about post-2030. We are, I would say, only in September 2024, so we still have a few years ahead. But look at what has happened here with the Summit of the Future, or last year with the SDG Summit. We cannot, even if we want to be positive and so on, we cannot escape the reality that it is becoming extremely difficult to reach out to all of the development goals. And of course, in the background, geopolitics are becoming complicated or fragmented, but this is not new, right? We have been in the past decades through periods of very intense tensions and so on. What about development and sustainable development? Then I thought, you may remember in the late 70s, sorry to go back in time a little bit, but early 80s, who remembers about the report from the independent commission that was led then by the Chancellor of Germany, Willy Brandt? And at that time, the report that was edited in 1980 was a program for survival, right? It was a commission on independent development. It's very interesting because that was in the very early 80s, right? And then there was a complement. And then a few years later, 86, 87, there was what is generally quoted as the Brundtland report, right? And about sustainable development. And everybody knows about the Brundtland report, and everybody has forgotten completely about the program for survival. If you look back, not everything might sound very accurate as for now, but a number of very deep considerations about development, inequalities, and a number of foresight aspects about the development of economic systems and what we have started to call globalization after the end of the Cold War was already there. I cannot help but think that somehow the global community after the end of the Cold War has gone 100% into sustainable development, and that the other half has largely been somehow sidelined, if not completely forgotten. And hence, we have not worked sufficiently. We have been thinking that because there would be growth, and that growth should be sustainable, right, with existing patterns of growth and production and consumption systems, that would be fine. But we have probably undervalued the need to think more deeply about those very values of development when it was in the aftermath of decolonization and it was still a rural planet and we were all talking about the third world, etc. Those issues were far more accurate. And then they have sort of disappeared in a horizon of more growth, less poverty, more integration of global trade, etc. And in the past 30 years, this has been so. And we have reached clearly the end of this pattern and cycle of infrastructure systems also that have been built throughout the world, including digital infrastructure, including like interconnected cities, if you want to take cities also as part of those infrastructures. But then you can think about development corridors, you can think about all the physical infrastructure, be it port systems, airport systems, and others. That have been participating to alleviating poverty for sure globally and supporting growth, but probably at the expense of a nice, thorough rethinking of development. And we are constantly saying, oh, for sure, there are a couple of billions of people who do not have access to electricity. Also, there are a number of very vulnerable countries which are suffering directly from the impacts of global warming. And yes, there might be 100 countries, lower income or developing countries that are directly being impacted by highly structural and unsustainable debt issues. And we are constantly considering that, oh, this might be solved. But if you add up all the issues which are on the table, which might be solved and which are not being solved, then we realize that it is not a luxury to take the next couple of years right now as the next frontier to rethink maybe a bit differently, not just the issues of sustainability, but sustainability and what real development means. And I would like to finish by saying that somehow, after it was formally initiated by the Prime Minister of India, especially at the COP in Glasgow, right? This LiFE with the capital F and capital E aspect. And then it was further discussed. And last year, there were the issuance of the Varanasi principles and many discussions about life economy or life economies with or without capital F and capital E and so on. And in the T20 and other groups, these have been further discussed. And this year, we have further investigated this, including by creating a global alliance for life economy, research and innovation, that somehow this might be an opportunity to get back to what has not been done in the past 3 or 4 decades. That makes the task extremely interesting or exciting, but also very challenging because we are late, right? And there is not much time ahead. So I think, echoing what Ligia was saying, when there are discussions with Indian colleagues, Brazilian colleagues, major emerging countries, presidencies of Indonesia, India, Brazil, next year, South Africa, this might be the exact right moment not to miss. Because otherwise, what will happen, we meet again in 2 years or in a year from now, and then around the same round table, we'll say, oh, it's terrible. The gaps to achieve the SDGs, there were 3 trillions, and now there were 4 trillions, and now there are 5. What is a gap of 5 or 6 or 7 trillion? It's not a gap, right? It means it's a red alert that is among all of us about the need to address profound system failures. But instead of being pessimistic, and I will finish with that, instead of being pessimistic, I think that if you look back in the past, there were attempts that for many reasons did not go through, but there were attempts to do so. So we are not starting from scratch, but we are starting late, and we must envision development thoroughly and in a much more comprehensive way that probably we have been too much relying on the comfortable mattress of sustainable development and sustainability, whereas we need to rethink more about development and inequities and inequalities.
Now, Nicolas, we do talk of going beyond GDP a lot these days, and there are shortcomings in GDP, but maybe it should not be thrown altogether. But definitely, there are other indices on well-being. There are many indices on well-being, and then happiness report also comes. And my teacher at LSE, London School of Economics, Richard Laird, is actively involved in it. So I read it very passionately. What take do you have that how do we measure, say, well-being or utility or whatever, or in what direction we need to move so that we can capture sustainability and the issues related to life? Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an extremely nice question, but I'm thinking about how to answer in 2 minutes, right? With the think tank I'm chairing in Paris that we created 15 years ago, and with the Asian Development Bank Institute in Tokyo, advising the Dean and CEO Tetsushi Sonobe. We have been looking, of course, in those questions, and especially last year, when we were discussing as part of the G7 presidency of Japan, but also how to bridge the G7 presidency of Japan with the G20 presidency of India, how to move forward with this very, I would say, thorough, universal, but also delicate question of GDP transformations and changes. So fortunately, this is also at the agenda of the life economy approach. But that is a good thing. However, when you look back till the turn of the millennium, or let's say 2000, the beginning of the 2000s, 5, 6, 7, for example, at that time, France and the French president, together with Indian prominent experts and others, tried to address the question of reforming profoundly the GDP system so as not just to measure growth, but also to measure other aspects of well-being and give it a macroeconomic give it macroeconomic foundations and so on. And this was taken very seriously, and this was backed by very, I would say, serious work, and major universities and research centers were part. The question is, why didn't it go through? And I always remember former Minister of Italy of Sustainable Infrastructure, who also used to be the chief statisticians of OECD, Enrico Giovannini, when we have been discussing about that on several occasions, in 2015 wrote a very nice article about the hopes that the SDGs framework and Agenda 2030 would be a way precisely to infuse GDP transformations in the economy. When we look back, obviously, this has not been happening. So what conclusions to derive from that? First, that probably the macroeconomic approach of the 2030 agenda, there are a number of misconceptions, or at least a number of fundamental weaknesses. And I would take another example, which is the new urban agenda that was approved in Quito at the Habitat 3 Summit in 2016, where the considerations about the urban economy of today are even weaker. And that's a big problem. But then the good news is that after the G20 India and the G20 Brazil, for the first time, we see a convergence between, let's say, the macroeconomic approach and discussions with all the innovations, including about the role of multilateral development banks and the United Nations systems, right? And here, at the occasion of the Summit of the Future and at the occasion of the UN General Assembly, we have seen that for the first time this was happening. So there are a number of signs of hopes in terms of processing, but it is clear that we need probably to team up more effectively. I'm very glad that our friend Pamla is here today. We're together, thanks to Pamla, at the representation of the African Union. And these kind of exchanges, these kinds of discussions, we utterly need them, right, to overcome a number of preconceptions, barriers, but also to rush into the breach that has been opened in the past few months and confirmed by Brazil. That is this kind of plug-in between macroeconomic approaches and transformations as per the G20, right? And then G7 and BRICS and whomever, and what can be achieved throughout the UN in terms of improving the future.
Thank you. And I would like to add here that Ligia as well as Nicole, you're not only spoken on the questions, but you're also given a way forward. And next I move to Pamla. Pamla, with your kind of experience over years, we talk of inclusive growth to take care of vulnerable people. So how do you feel that fits in with say growth and inclusive? Can it be together, or does inclusiveness come into the way of growth? And how vulnerable people can be helped through such a growth within the parameters of, say, life economy?
Thank you so much. First of all, apologies for being late. I thought I could make it, but you know the challenges on the street today. And I also want to use this opportunity to convey sincere apologies on behalf of Dr. Mayaki. He was called in by the chair of the African Union, so I wanted to register that. So it's a real privilege for me to be here today. And to answer your question simply, inclusivity means all, and it's always a challenge to bring in these macroeconomic perspectives and views to a micro level. So I think to be quite honest, the important thing, and at the African Union Development Agency, over 2 decades now, we are working towards sustainable life and adopting areas to eradicate poverty and to bring our initiatives down to the grassroots level. I think as individuals, we create an agency of change, and it is important to implement these agencies of change in our daily lives, whether it's consuming less plastics, or in our productivity, even at the meta level that we do production and manufacturing. I think it all contributes to a collective effort in this micro space to scale up to a macro level. And how we can do that is by being in platforms, as Nicolas said, ones of the G20, to make sure that these policies are actionable. I am happy to say that Brazil this year is taking these actionable steps on implementing some of the policies, but also a lot of them stemmed from the Indian principles and the Varanasi principles of sustainable life. And it's good to know that the countries of the global south, which is also historic because 3 years in a row, and as South Africa, the country that I am from, will be hosting the G20 next year. These are the important platforms to take these policy measures forward, and so that we can make sure that it's actionable and not just talk. But the countries, the troika at the moment, and even going into next year, have demonstrated that they can continue in what has been laid down by the India LiFE economies for sustainable development.
We know that during the Indian presidency, African Union became a member of G20. So how do you look at it for achieving what we are discussing today, and as well as with your vast experience in the field, if you can give some examples from the countries you visited where lifestyles are changing or things like that?
Okay. All right. That is very, very important in terms of the fact that the African Union holding a seat at the G20, in the next generation, Africa's population will be double of what the population is currently. We can use that opportunity to actually leverage on this increase in population by instilling these principles that we have constantly re-engineering for sustainable growth. To give you some examples of what is happening at the country level, for example, in South Africa, you all know that we have massive energy and water crisis in the country right now. And there are actions to be taken on creating the solar and, processes and alternatives for generating energy. These are some of the steps that I think countries should be taking. I mentioned Brazil, but Brazil is also trying to use the Amazon to increase, soya beans and other commodities so that they can reduce exports for local consumption. These are some of the areas in the African continent. We have the Continental Free Trade Agreement. We are encouraging intra-Africa trade. This means that we are encouraging trade and consumption, the movement of people within the continent, not to also be overly dependent on global crisis that happens. We've seen through the war how our shelves have been emptied. So by reinforcing local consumption, local production, I think we can really eradicate a global challenge that we are having. But ultimately, I think to address the climate issues in the little that we do in the behavior of our everyday lives all contributes to this, ultimate objective that India is trying to instill in just our lifestyles and livelihoods.
Thank you. I come to Rafaela, and since you come from CEBRI, how Brazilian presidency has given further traction to, say, Varanasi principles and life economy?
Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to be here with friends and different parts of the world being represented. It's very interesting to see this movement and different opinions. But coming to the life economy, when it comes to Brazil, we have tackled it a different way during the G20, but with the same principles. So within our presidency, 3 items have been highlighted. Within then, combating hunger, poverty, and inequality. And Ligia started actually with Buchoud. I'm not sure if it's Ligia or Buchoud that we're mentioning, but yes, we still have 7 million people which are in hunger. and within the country. So exactly, we have reached different levels, but within the different countries, we see a lot of this poverty still persisting and growing. The sustainable development and energy transition as a second priority. And yes, we have 2.3 billion people in the world that still do not have access to clean cooking. And this is reality in Brazil, this is reality in India, this is reality in Africa and several other parts of the world. Then reforming the governance, and this is very special for Brazil, has been highlighting this, for instance, reforming organisms as the World Bank and others. If we look to the numbers, only 15% of global investment in energy transition has been going to developing countries. So it's shocking how we are talking, and SDGs have been there for a while. It will be like 5 years from now. And this is still the reality. So when tackling this, one thing that Brazil did during its presidency, it has made a change. And we're seeing movements and it's starting to feel more like things are being done, is when they put in the same room the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Environment, and provoking this talk within the system. So, and then when it comes, we have been discussing, and CEBRI has been very vocal on that, on the just energy transition and the pillars within that. So accelerating finance for the energy transition, highlighting the social dimension of this transition. So we need to discuss what are the jobs that will be created. How are we going to reduce the social inequalities within the societies, and developing sustainable fuels, which is also an alternative. And this I would like to expand, because this is a reality for India, this is a reality for Brazil, and this could be a reality for other parts of the world. So there is a lot of opportunities, not only from electrification, because changing all the infrastructure within our countries is very costly. So we have been very vocal that each country will have to pick the best solution that can bring together paving the way so that we achieve net zero, but at the same time that is economically viable. So it is at the least costly possible for the population. So we, and then we see a lot of discussions, so if we have if biofuels, we will be at the same time competing with food. That's not true. We have a lot of numbers that can prove this. And Brazil has been, we as a think tank have been publishing a lot about that. It's feasible to have both. So these are part of the things that we have been discussing, and that we are seeing some evolvements. And to start tackling the do, what are the mechanisms, what is the financial mechanisms that have to be in place? How can we blend multilateral banks with private investment, with concessional and creative business models, so that we can unleash and really move forward with these different projects within the energy space and with other space that will bring the prosperity.
Okay, I think I have some time for questions. So please introduce yourself and tell whom your question is directed to.
Manish Chand, Center for Global India Insights. As far as life economy is concerned, do you see a cleavage between developed and developing countries? So right now, South countries are holding the presidencies and a new cycle will begin. Do you see there is a gap of perception or assessment between developed and developing countries? And what would it mean really going forward? Thank you.
I'm from India, but G20 is passed for India, so it's for the two of you to answer. But I just wanted to say, the LiFE is not just for the developing countries, it's for the world, okay? And if we want to motivate change, we need to work with youth. And we do not today have a sufficient focus on youth. We did women, we did digital, but we did not focus on youth. And it's really important. If you want to change the development paradigm, we need to focus on youth. And all of the countries that you're talking about have huge proportions of population. And Pamla mentioned that, of youth. Why is youth important? Is because youth, if you look at the market research, it's a youth who are showing an indication of wanting to align life or their choices with sustainability. And so that is the group that we really need to work with to take forward this. And the girl effect that you saw in the last panel, I thought it would be good to have a consumption effect, a life effect, which would be the same kind to create a collective movement going forward. So to answer your question briefly, it is not just for one group or the other, it's for the world.
My name is Pratyush. I am from Global South Center for Excellence and RIS. It's not a question. I just wanted to comment on, the excellent panel talking about life. One of the things that you guys discussed about the post-GDP or the post-GDP calculation, I would like to bring to focus the India's, take on South-South cooperation through this idea of Global Development Compact, in which we say that, of course, financing for development is important, but it is not the end of it. In the first session, we did hear panelists talking about how capacity issues are there in countries of the Global South, how technology is a big issue in countries of the Global South. So India's take on South-South cooperation through the idea of Development Compact is trade for development. The second is capacity building for sustainable growth, technology sharing, and project-specific concessional finance and grants. So this is the package of Development Compact that India believes in the idea of South-South cooperation. So it was, as I said, not a question, just a comment that I wanted to make. Thank you.
I would like to express my gratitude to the excellent panel we had. And the best part is that each one of them not only spoke on challenges, but also how and what should be done to move forward. So that was the best part of it. Thank you very much.